Mara Sanchez clocked in before dawn at the county hospital laundry. Steam hung over the sorting tables like a low ceiling. She liked the work because it stayed honest and predictable. Her hands knew every fold, every stain, every missing tag. Outside, the coastal city was waking to buses and gulls. Inside, the machines answered with steady thumps and clicks. Mara kept her pay stubs in a shoebox under the bed. She had learned to save paper when money stayed tight. Her husband drove rideshare nights and slept mornings. Their daughter needed braces, and the estimate sat unopened. Mara promised herself she would manage it without begging. The laundry supervisor, Mr. Kell, rarely raised his voice. He spoke softly, and people leaned closer to hear him. He praised teamwork during huddles and then cut hours later. Mara noticed he always blamed budgets, never his own choices. When a coworker asked about overtime, Kell cited policy language. The words sounded reasonable if you did not track details. Mara tracked details because she could not afford surprises. Her shift ended at 3, yet she often stayed later. Kell asked for favors, and he called them professional development. He said flexible staff were considered first for promotions. Mara wanted the lead position for the small raise. She also wanted a schedule that matched her daughter's school. Some weeks, her time card showed fewer hours than she remembered. She assumed she misread the clock or forgot a break. Kell reminded everyone to clock out for any interrupted lunch. He smiled like a teacher correcting an eager student. The hospital prided itself on compliance and employee wellness. Posters in hallways listed hotlines and confidential reporting options. Mara read them while pushing carts past the loading dock. She wondered who answered those calls and who heard rumors. At home, she compared her check to her calendar notes. The numbers were close enough to quiet her worries. Still, a thin unease followed her through the week. During a supply shortage, Kell asked staff to skip formal breaks. He said the hospital depended on them during a difficult month. Mara agreed because she did not want coworkers punished. She told herself it would balance out when staffing improved. Then her daughter brought home a letter about orthodontic deadlines. The deadline meant a discount, but only if paid quickly. Mara checked her banking app and felt her throat tighten. A missing $40 now mattered like missing $400. She reviewed her last 3 stubs with a kitchen calculator. The pattern looked small, but it repeated across pay periods. Mara asked Kell for a timecard printout in a calm voice. He nodded and said payroll systems sometimes rounded automatically. He offered to check, then suggested she focus on quality. Mara left his office feeling watched, but also foolish. That evening, she wrote every shift start and end time. You might think it was paranoia, but it felt necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, she recorded breaks and interruptions precisely. She compared her notes to the portal where time punches appeared. Several punches shifted by 5 or 10 minutes each day. The changes always reduced her total hours, never increased them. Mara asked a coworker, Denise, whether she noticed similar edits. Denise shrugged and said her paycheck was always hard to follow. Denise warned that Kell disliked people who questioned procedures. Mara stopped discussing it and started gathering proof quietly. She downloaded weekly time reports and saved them to a drive. The hospital system required 2-factor login, which made her careful. One morning, Kell held a meeting about attendance compliance. He reminded staff that inaccurate punching could be disciplinary. Mara heard the message as a cover for later accusations. She emailed payroll with a polite question about rounding rules. Payroll replied with a generic link to a handbook section. The section allowed rounding, but only if it was neutral. Her records showed the rounding always favored the employer. Mara scheduled a short meeting with Human Resources after her shift. The HR specialist listened, then asked whether she had screenshots. Mara showed exported reports and her notebook timestamps. HR said they would investigate and asked her to remain discreet. 2 days later, Kell removed Mara from the training list. He said her performance needed consistency before leadership duties. Mara asked what changed, and Kell cited recent distraction. His tone stayed pleasant, which made the criticism sting more. She feared HR had told him, even if they promised privacy. At home, she drafted a timeline and organized files by date. Her husband worried she would lose her job and begged caution. Mara felt anger, but she also felt responsible for stability. You may know the feeling of choosing between truth and rent. HR followed up with a letter stating no payroll error was found. The letter explained that rounding was applied consistently across departments. Mara asked for supporting data, and HR declined due to confidentiality. She realized internal channels would protect the institution first. Mara checked her saved reports and noticed some were missing. Her access to older timesheets suddenly required supervisor approval. Kell said it was a normal security update after an audit. The explanation sounded plausible, yet the timing felt targeted. Mara began photographing the clock-in screen with her phone. She did it quickly, hiding the device inside a scrub pocket. A coworker spotted her once and looked away without comment. Mara started taking pictures of the schedule board too. She kept duplicates in a private email draft, never sending them. Kell announced mandatory weekend coverage due to rising patient volume. He assigned Mara the heaviest block, citing her reliability. The extra hours should have helped, but the edits kept happening. Mara calculated she had lost nearly $600 in months. It was not catastrophic, yet it was enough to break plans. She researched state labor rules at the public library after work. A volunteer at the reference desk showed her wage complaint forms. Mara hesitated because the hospital was the city's biggest employer. She pictured Kell telling others she was a troublemaker. Instead of filing immediately, she requested her personnel file in writing. The hospital produced a thin file with generic evaluations and signatures. One evaluation mentioned tardiness, even though her notes showed early arrivals. Mara realized the record was being shaped for a future defense. She asked Denise again, and this time, Denise admitted seeing edits too. Denise refused to sign anything, but she allowed Mara to photograph stubs. The stubs matched Mara's pattern, always rounding down to the quarter hour. Mara contacted the state labor office and asked about neutral rounding tests. The officer explained they needed multiple pay periods and clear comparisons. Mara sent scanned logs, photos, and the handbook excerpt. Weeks passed, and the labor office said they were reviewing backlog. During the wait, Kell wrote Mara up for a minor labeling mistake. He cited safety standards, and the write-up looked standard and careful. Mara signed it with a note stating she disagreed with the facts. Kell smiled and said the note showed professionalism and transparency. Her next schedule shifted to late evenings with no explanation. Childcare costs rose, and her husband took more driving shifts. The household grew quiet, measured, as if words might cost money. You can feel courage shrink when everyone around you needs calm. Mara considered dropping the complaint and accepting the loss. Then she found a coworker, Raymond, crying beside the vending machines. Raymond said his paycheck missed overtime and his landlord filed eviction. Mara told him quietly that he was not alone. Raymond feared retaliation, yet he agreed to keep his own records. Together, they compared punch times with text messages and bus receipts. The edits were systematic, clustered on high-volume days. Mara asked the labor officer for advice on preserving digital evidence. The officer suggested exporting reports and noting when access changed. Mara wrote down the date her portal access became restricted. She filed a formal wage claim with attachments and a sworn statement. 2 weeks later, a state investigator called and scheduled interviews. The investigator said the hospital had provided policy documents and summaries. Mara asked whether the state would see raw punch logs. The investigator said they could request them if discrepancies appeared credible. Kell announced an internal compliance review and encouraged full cooperation. He said cooperation would reflect well during upcoming performance cycles. Mara recognized the message as a legal shield rather than a threat. Still, her stomach clenched each time she entered his office. The compliance reviewer asked Mara about her note-taking habits. Mara explained she tracked hours to budget family expenses carefully. She avoided accusing anyone and described only verifiable discrepancies. The reviewer asked whether she had ever worked off the clock. Mara admitted she sometimes skipped breaks during shortages at Kell's request. The reviewer nodded and asked whether those missed breaks were recorded. Mara said they were not, and she provided dates from her notebook. After the interview, Kell reassigned Mara to the folding station alone. He said her focus would improve without social distractions. The isolation made errors more likely because help was farther away. A week later, Mara was accused of miscounting linens for surgery. She checked the cart tags and found the numbers matched her count. Kel accepted the correction, yet he still filed a coaching note. This setback frightened Mara more than the missing wages. She worried the hospital could fire her for a paper trail. You would probably worry too, even with evidence in hand. The state investigator later requested raw timekeeping logs from payroll. Payroll responded that the vendor system stored logs in a proprietary format. The investigator issued a formal demand for the native export file. During this period, Mara's portal access was restored without explanation. She downloaded everything again and saved copies to 3 locations. Raymond reported that his edits stopped abruptly the same week. Kel began emphasizing accurate breaks and urged staff to take them. The shift in messaging felt like an attempt to reset records. The investigator interviewed Denise, who confirmed her pay seemed short. Denise refused to accuse Kel, but she provided her pay stubs. The investigator ran a neutrality analysis on several employees' punches. The analysis showed downward rounding far exceeded upward rounding over months. A second analysis found manual edits clustered under Kel's supervisor credentials. The hospital argued edits corrected missed punches and improved accuracy. The investigator noted that corrections should not consistently reduce pay. A formal conference was scheduled with hospital counsel and department leaders. Mara attended with shaking hands and a folder of printed logs. Counsel asked careful questions, framing everything as administrative efficiency. Mara answered slowly, refusing speculation and repeating the documented pattern. The investigator presented charts showing net wage loss across the laundry team. Kel stated he followed policy and relied on vendor rounding defaults. The investigator displayed audit entries showing Kel manually approved edits. Kel said approvals were required, and he trusted the system's suggestions. The investigator asked why suggestions always decreased payable hours. Silence settled, and even the counsel stopped typing for a moment. The hospital requested time to calculate back wages and review practices. 2 weeks later, the state issued a written determination of wage violations. The order required back pay, interest, and a penalty for repeated errors. Mara received a check large enough to cover braces and overdue bills. Raymond received his missing overtime and avoided eviction by days. The hospital also signed a compliance agreement requiring quarterly timekeeping audits. Kel kept his job, but his edit permissions were removed permanently. He was transferred to logistics support, where approvals were reviewed daily. The hospital issued a memo reminding staff how to report pay concerns. Mara felt relief, yet she also felt grief for the months of fear. Some coworkers thanked her quietly, while others avoided her eyes. Denise said she was proud, then admitted she still hated conflict. Mara returned to steady folding, but she kept her notebook habit. You cannot always change a system, but you can document reality. On payday, she opened the shoebox and added the final determination letter. The paper did not erase the past, yet it proved she was right. Mara walked outside into salt air, listening to the city breathe.